Greetings, Claude here. We're going to talk today about procurement and tenders. When we talk about procurement, we are thinking about purchasing in the purchasing function. Not everyone will define procurement exactly the same way, but for a large part, it's about a range of activities undertaken in obtaining goods and services. In this scenario, I'd like to discuss a proposed construction build project. It will be going out for tender. Here is some of the design work for the architect that has provided in our project. We can see that in the lower right-hand corner. What do we need to consider regarding a tender? Tendering in construction is a process of a business inviting contractors to bid on a construction project. The bids are based on the tender documents that the client has issued, which becomes part of the contract. There are various stages and sub-stages when we consider the process of building our new proposed building. So let's review them. The design stage, where we create the bidding documents and prepare a budget. Sourcing stage, identifying the potential bidders. Assessing the successful bidder at some point, after certainly the tenders have closed. In the purchasing stage, well, this is where we enter into the contract or an agreement for the work. And certainly a critical stage is the payment stage. We have to review the work completed, approve and pay for the work completed, and certainly keep records. In our proposed new building project, we will need an architect and possibly an engineer in various stages of review to solidify our building design, and likely an engineer certainly to design the structure for the proposed laminated wood beams that we're going to have for this project. The owners typically hire an architect or an engineer to lead in preparing all the contract documents for larger projects. Equally as important will be the cost estimate. What have we budgeted? Will the project fall within budget? An idea of the cost to build this project. But before we get too far, the architect requires a lot of information from the owner, what is often referred to as a building program, a building design requirement in the owner's budget for the construction. So when we take a look at the lower left corner, we can see what is called a design functional relationship, which eventually leads into a more refined floor plan, basic preliminary drawing, over to the right-hand side. So consideration, we need to create bidding documents and prepare a budget for costing, hiring the service of a designer, ensuring the compatibility of the project's intent doesn't meet the intent of the purpose of the building, completion of construction drawings and specifications, known as the contract documents, and certainly determine if the design and the budget seem to be a logical match. Is it simply affordable? In most projects, the design team consists of the following. Thus, the architect functions as the prime design professional and to a limited degree as the owner's representative. So on top here, we see our owner, the architect, again, a close relationship between the two, working relationship, that is, coming up with the design. In place of the architect, it could be an engineer. Possibly, if it's through an architect, civil structural consultants, outside services, structural design, and so on. But what about building services? This may involve mechanical, electrical, other building service consultants, or other consultants. For example, is it for acoustics, or special kitchens, things like that? So again, this kind of gives us an idea of the design team. On our next slide, we're going to talk about the sourcing stage. So at the sourcing stage, we need to seek the interest from bidders or decide if this will be an open or a closed process. For the bidding, the bidders must have bidding documents and clear information in detail regarding the bidding requirements. Upon bid time closing, by reviewing and carefully analyzing the bid, it comes down to a decision of determining who the successful bidder will be. Again, this may be an open or a closed process. So again, just kind of looking at considerations, identifying potential bidders, assessing the successful bidders, requires invitations to bid or an opening of bid. Bidding process requires writing a tender, which is really what we're trying to focus on here to define the bidding requirements, but more about this later. And at the closing of the bidding process, reviewing the bids and certainly determining who the successful bidder exactly is. Next, we talk about the purchasing stage. At this stage, the owner typically would be entering into an agreement or a contract for work defined by the bidding documents for the agreed upon bid price. Again, considerations. Entering into that agreement for the work is a big step. Assuming the price is agreed upon, an agreement would be signed and agreed upon. However, if the estimated cost was significantly higher, there likely would be a negotiation at this particular stage. Alternatively, depending on the terms defined, it may indicate that the owner may not accept any of the bids at all. Again, when we take a look at the purchasing stage, again, we see the owner, the architect and consultants. In the owner forming a relationship, if the successful bidder is assigned into a contract with the general contractor, and we see below the general contractor a series of potential subcontractors. So this could be, for example, plumbing, electrical, heating, and so on, a second-tier subcontractor, or simply a material supplier. So again, a lot of things to think about even at the purchasing stage. So the owner-architect contract, there will be an agreement between the two. And certainly the owner and general contractor will have a contract. So thus we end up with two contracts. The owner-architect agreement in terms of, we'll call it work, and certainly between the owner and the general contractor. You notice there's no direct connection between the architect and the general contractor, other than if the owner has given the owner and architect contract terms to oversee the general contractor. Again, likely a higher fee is involved in this type of arrangement. When we take a look at this next slide, we're going to talk about on the payment stage. At the payment stage, there are a number of tasks to consider. Review the work completed, approve and pay for the work completed, and certainly there's records to be kept and maintained. So we have to review the amount and percentage of work complete, verify to release for the payment approval, may require verification or approval by the architect or engineer as well as the owner, may require consideration of any changes or modifications to the contractual agreement. So for example, addendums or changes may be issued, change orders, etc. Release of funds for payment, and the best practice of tracking and recording the dates and information for good record keeping. So again, when we think on basing upon the application for payment submitted by the contractor, the owner obviously would be responsible to make periodic payments. This is generally monthly. The owner-contractor agreement defines how these payments are made, and generally payment amounts reflect the percentage of work that's completed and any materials purchased and approved that is currently on site. Often, if the architect or engineer is involved, the request for payment is submitted to them. This often is reviewed based on the contractor's proposed schedule of values, the various phases or stages of work. There may be what is deemed a holdback. For example, this is often off First Nation communities, deemed to be typically 10%. Retained until the final completion of the work, making sure that all the bills have been paid. If there's a problem with the work, such as a dispute or overbilling a portion, or perhaps more may be withheld from the contractor until the problem is resolved. It is also important that the contractor must also warrant or guarantee that the owner has obtained the materials and equipment clear of any future claims regarding a claim for non-payment. Well, let's talk about the term substantial completion for a moment. In general, contracts must be completely performed. Consideration: Legally, anything less is deemed to be a breach of contract. A construction contract that is deemed substantially complete, the contractor is entitled to the contract amount less the value of the incomplete work. Upon final completion, the contractor is entitled to final payment. And if there's mechanic liens or holdback that are part of the agreement, then this will be in effect the amount of the final payment through the lien period. So depending on the terms of the contractor, specific conditions can apply when it comes to substantial completion. Final completion or holdback funds for payment. Thus, it's important to have written certification of what applies for these specific conditions. When we take a look at our next point here, tender is a process on its own. Bidding is just a step towards applying for the tender and getting it. An invitation to tender is applicable in construction projects where an owner knows what exactly they want in full detail. In the case with the tender, the details, expectations, and terms are established. The requests for quote are not the same as a tender, but it's usually small, just simply smaller in scale. Since the bid is only an offer, it can be withdrawn at any time without penalty before it's accepted. So contractors typically receive invitations to bid on a project by mail, by newspaper, by advertisement, or perhaps through private sources. The difference between bid document and tender document exactly lies in how the contracts are obtained. In reality, many companies use the terms bid and tender sort of interchangeably. The purpose of the bidding process is to qualify and select a successful contractor to perform the work identified in the bidding documents for a particular estimated cost, and often within a certain period of time. So who's involved in the bidding process? We take a look at this particular slide. We can see here that basically bidding does not directly involve the owner until the results are presented in the bid or tender submission. In large projects, it often involves a whole team of participants. We can see here the architect or engineer who prepares the bidding documents and often includes the contract documents. General contractor, the bidder, having the primary responsibility of deciding how the work will be done and certainly submitting a price, an estimate, or a tender. Subcontractors may be involved. In fact, they're typically involved or to require specific specialist work such as plumbing, electrical, and heating, perhaps even structural. And again, material suppliers. We need materials to build the project. So the sourcing out of building materials is an important part of the building process for most every trade involved in any construction work. And what about the bid and contract documents? When we talk about the bid and contract documents, you need to think about there are three types of documents often associated with the bid and contract process. So for example, the contract documents includes agreements, definition, general conditions, supplementary conditions, often defined in the CCDC, so the Canadian Construction Document Committee documents. Bid documents, including things such as the drawings, the specifications, plus any instructions to bidders, the bid form, and any supplementary information documents. So supplementary information might be soil tests, items of interest like that. In contract forms, specially prepared forms used for the agreement and for the contract to be formed. So a complete set of bid and contract documents as indicated to obtain competitive price on a construction project includes the drawings that illustrate the quantity and position and location of the products within the building assembly or for the building assembly, and the specifications that specifically describe the quality and acceptable installation practices in reference to the type of contract. So some of the common bidding documents often include the following. So when we think about the bidding, we want to talk about, let's talk about competitive bidding. Contractors have an opportunity to submit their best bid by a specific deadline. The owner compares bids against one another. A construction bid is part of the process of submitting a proposal for the construction project. Using a bid proposal form can be one effective way of preparing or for receiving bids. Specific bidding documents are designed and intended to help the bidders get a clear understanding of the factors under which conditions of the bid will be fairly received and accepted. So we can see here the advertisement or an RFP, request for proposal, tender pricing documents, scope of work, time of completion, any penalties or bonuses that may apply, certainly construction drawings, the specifications, and the tender form. So some typical things we would want to see on the tender form is a type of contract, cost price basis, references to the bidding documents. What about a proposed work schedule? And are there any contractors or subcontractors that are going to be involved with this particular project? So when we take a look at the next slide, bids are legal proposals to construct a project as defined in the contract and or contract documents. We can see here there are three of the most common types of bid that are included are stipulated price, a unit price, or what's referred to as a cost plus type contract. There certainly are other different types of bids that may be used for example, best value, price and performance based, negotiated, direct chosen contractor with a negotiated price, a direct bid, non-competitive single source provider, or a low bid, looking for a competitive lowest bidder, often in reference to the most common types listed above. So for example, the most common one is the stipulated price. Bidders are bidding and submitting their price, and often the lowest tender would be accepted. But as I indicated earlier, not in all cases. So let's take a think about bids in the bid forms. So it's important to have bid in bid forms. We need clear, concise information upon which the bidders can basically submit a bid. When we take a look at this slide, the sample invitation and bid submission form, the bid form is a document sent to the owner or the owner's representative, such as the architect or possibly the engineer, to be completed, indicating that they are submitting a bid based on a construction document. So for example, we can see on this particular document, number one, the owner, bids will be received until date and time. Bids shall be for the complete work as described. All bidders are instructed to examine the drawings and certainly the project manual, specifications, and so on. Do they have to offer certificates of insurance? And we can see as we go through here, there are other in the owner's name and the owner's address. And then that was the invitation to bid. On the opposite side, we take a look at construction bid forms. So again, this is what the bidder will submit with their bid. So let's talk a bit about competitive bidding and best value. When we take a look at this particular slide, in construction bidding, price is always a key for consideration. On many projects, especially in government construction, the owner must choose the lowest bidder. On other jobs, however, qualifications or other factors can equally or be more important than simply the price. Note this will be specifically addressed when we talk about the selection of bidders in an upcoming webinar. So competitive bidding with the lowest bidder is the principle behind the low bid procurement method. This is one of the traditional procurement methods. With the best value, source selection is a procurement method in which the buyer awards contracts based on other factors, just not cost alone. The goal is to achieve the best combination of price and certainly good, high quality performance. As I noted, the selection of a contract will be covered in another upcoming webinar on procurement and selecting a contractor. So what about the instructions to bidders? When we talk about the instructions to bidders, they need to have some basic information in order to accurately submit their bid. So when we take a look at the instruction to bidders list, assists the bidders to fully assess the conditions under which the bids are to be submitted. Typically, these include the following: who is the offer made to, location, bid closing date and time, are there any deposits required for the bidding documents, who can request the documents, any bidder security requirements, procuring methods for any procedures rather, and methods for any substitutions, or substitutions allowed, in other words. Methods used for issuing an addenda, need for a project briefing or an on-site visit, proposed construction schedule, minimum qualifications for any bidder, time and information regarding bids open or for acceptance or simply for rejection. So again, there's a lot of different instructions that can be offered to the bidder to help clarify what is required for the submission of their bid. What about supplemental documents? During the bidding period, supplementary documents may be issued to the bidders to help in clarifying certain conditions or details. Sometimes questions come up. Typically, this can include things such as subsurface or soil reports, perhaps climatic studies such as winter precipitation, so weather conditions or things that could affect the project. Clarification of the drawings and details or specifications. Sometimes the drawings and specifications are not perfect and may require specific detailed clarification. Is there any special scheduling of work? For example, could it be a building that's partially occupied that you can only access certain areas at specific times? Or partial occupancy requirements, which kind of falls into the same or similar category, and the criteria used certainly to assess the bids. So closing condition. In this presentation, we covered the following: procurement stages, substantial completion, purpose of the bidding process, what is required, who's involved, the calling for bids, and what documents and forms are typically required. What information the bidder is required to submit for their bid. Depending on the size and complexity of the construction project, procurement can be simple or become very complex. Again, thank you. If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. Again, my name's Claude Lawrenson. My email is indicated there. I also want to remind people that if you go onto the FNNBOA, First Nation National Building Officers Association website, you can find procurement documents. A series has been made available that you can download. Again, having been involved with John with the procurement development process, again, I thank you, and I look forward to any feedback or comments. Again, thank you for listening. Again, feel free to ask questions.